Hey guys, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show. I'm your host, Ryan Cartledge, and I'm really excited that you have decided to take time out of your busy schedules to come and hang out today. We're really grateful for you tuning in. And if you have been listening to the podcast for a while, we really appreciate this. Thank you so much. Hopefully you have subscribed so that you never miss an episode. But if not, or if you are new to the show, get yourself over to iTunes, Stitcher, animaltrainingacademy.com, or whatever it is you're listening to this podcast on, and hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss a single episode. We are bringing you today's episode on behalf of the Animal Training Academy, or ATA membership. If you like the conversations in these podcasts, then I want to invite you to continue them with like-minded people within the ATA membership area, which you can find out more about over on the ATA website. Within the membership, you can get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalogue of previous web classes, plus a huge library of videos and projects to problem solve different training situations. And we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group, forums area, and WhatsApp chat groups. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behavior nerds. But we will get started on today's episode, where we will be talking to one Denise Fenzi. Denise has competed in a wide range of dog sports, titling dogs in obedience, tracking, IPO, Mondio ring, herding, conformation, and agility. She's best known for her flashy and precise obedience work and perfect scores in both IPO and Mondio ring sport obedience. While a successful competitor, Denise's real passion lies in training dogs and solving the problems that her own dogs and her students' dogs present. She is a recognized expert in developing drive, motivation, and focus in competition dogs, and is known internationally as an engaging speaker and an expert in no-force training for sports dogs. She has consistently demonstrated the ability to train and compete with dogs using motivational methods in sports where compulsion is the norm. In addition to training and speaking, Denise is a prolific writer. You can find her at www.denisefenzi.com, where she maintains an active blog on all things related to dog training, and you can also follow her as an active writer on Facebook. Denise and Deb Jones have recently finished a 4-book series, Dog Sports Skills, which has received a widespread acclaim in the dog sports community. In addition, she has written additional books on her own, including Train the Dog in Front of You, Beyond the Backyard, Train Your Dog to Listen Anytime, Anywhere, and for the younger audience, Blogger Dog Brito. Several of these books have won Maxwell Awards for Best Training and Behavior Book from the Dog Writers of America. Denise thoughtfully and persistently works to break down the barriers that prevent people from obtaining a truly interactive and mutually enjoyable sports relationship with their dogs. Fenzi Academy is the culmination of her efforts as a forward step in providing progressive information to any trainer who wishes to learn. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome Denise onto the show today. Denise, how are you?
I am fine. It is my pleasure to be here.
Absolute honor, and I am very much looking forward to geeking out with you over the next hour or so. We're going to dive straight into the first question today, Denise. And for this one, can you just take everyone listening back to where you started, where you first learned about positive reinforcement animal training, and share some stories from some of the first animals you ever trained using it?
Sure. So I've been training dogs for a long time, about 40 years, and my parents had dogs as well and did show and compete. And I actually remember talking with my mom about a method, I must have been, 10, where it was a thing where you waited for the dog to do the behavior and then you rewarded the dog. And we agreed that was about the stupidest thing we had ever heard of. And now with hindsight, I understand where that was coming from, and I can see the seeds of shaping in there, but we picked up what we picked up and we left out the rest. So I thought it was all pretty dumb. I was actually quite a rough trainer. I don't think young people should have the power over animals that I had at that time. A choke chain and such with a dog it's not, in my opinion, appropriate to give a child that much power, but I had it. And I was very hard on those various dogs. And I can tell you, we never asked the question, how does the dog feel about this? It was truly, it just didn't come up. Nobody asked, nobody thought about it. It was unimportant. I had Shelties, and we all know how they're just, bound and determined for world domination if you don't keep on top of them at every moment. So we lacked logic. And I would say I kind of held that belief for quite some time. And when I started to change, it was mostly just because I had a dog that I decided, because you formally didn't start teaching dogs till they were 6 months old. I don't know where that came from, but it was just out there. And I had a puppy, and I didn't want to do nothing for 4 or 6 months. So I started teaching him random tricks and bits and pieces. And the first time I did this at 6 months, I got out the appropriate choke chain and started to train him for real. The second dog, I got out the tricks and had a good time. And at 6 months, I just really couldn't think of a reason to switch what I was doing. So I just continued with, I was using a toy, not food. But anyway, I was using a toy to train him, and had no motivation to switch because it was working just fine. It was certainly not philosophical. And when I did run into problems with that dog over time, which we all will, I used compulsion fairly readily because I had no philosophical reason not to. But I would say I was much easier on him than, let's say, I had been on prior dogs, or maybe what other people were doing around me. But what really started to create the change was when I took on a new sport. I took on the sport of IPO. It used to be called Schutzhund. And they were so hard on their dogs. The place I was at, they were so hard. And that was offensive because I was watching it thinking, well, you don't know what you're doing. And you're really awfully hard on your dogs. And because I'm a little bit oppositional by nature, that upset me so much that I kind of went the other end. I was like, you don't need to do that. So I felt the need to model not using any compulsion. And I would say that actually probably was what caused my change, was more of a response to what I saw. And around that time, I started being exposed. Let's say that was, I honestly don't remember. I would say late 1990s, early 2000s. And I remember being exposed to the beginnings of what now I understand was more intelligent distraction training, more systematic, more clearer understanding of shaping and clicker training. My first at clicker training went very poorly because, again, I didn't know what I was doing. I was lumping, and I made a mess of it. And so, again, that had to be the method, right? Not me. So I did not really embrace that. I would say it was, we're in almost 2018, probably around 2005 that I started doing it better and more well, and started listening a little more carefully to what people were saying, still offended by the idea of needing to do purely positive. I hate that word, but I'm going to throw it out there. A more force-free approach. Is that better? And it wasn't until I realized, as I was teaching a lot of seminars, I was traveling a lot, I started to realize that I was never using compulsion with the dogs in the seminars because I was always just fixing the people. The people problems were so much bigger and more obvious that I never got to the dogs. And after a few years, that really started to cause me to stop and think, because I realized if I am consistently going places and seeing people and working with dogs, and I can see that the problems are clearly human generated and not dog generated, then is it okay for me to assume that on some occasions they are dog generated? The logic wasn't there, and I'm a pretty logical person. So while I had already stopped using it with my own dogs because I wasn't finding it necessary, I actually made a mental shift that it was really not okay for me to teach other people how to use compulsion with their dogs when they weren't really able to train correctly without it. And I have to say that when you take it off the table as an option, force, making things happen, it skyrockets your skills and your problem solving, because if it's no longer an option, boy, do you get creative and clever, because you have to. So what is that? Necessity is the mother of invention. So I think that was kind of my route. And I continue to learn a ton now, in particular, because I'm surrounded by people all the time who I'm very impressed by their skills. And so I have resource questions, and that also continues to refine my understanding of what positive training means to me and how to use it more effectively with other people.
And one of the things you said there, and I'm curious because I'm always trying to pull out what important elements have contributed to people along their journeys. One thing you said was you're oppositional by nature. Do you think that is something that has contributed to significantly to where you are today? That question or that desire to ask questions, why can't we do it better? And I want to show people we can do it better.
Yeah, there's no question about that. There's a couple of elements. First of all, I don't mind being wrong, and I haven't minded for a long time. What matters to me is understanding and trying my own ways. I just want to do my own thing. But the fact that I'm wrong most of the time doesn't bother me at all. And I actually think that's important because I just screw it up. Like, you told me to do this. I didn't want to do it your way. The next person told me to do it that way. I didn't want to do it their way either. Number 3 tells me I still don't want to do it. I am wrong 3 times in a row. I still don't care. Number 4 tells me I don't do it their way, but this time I'm right. And in my opinion, I actually wrote a blog about this called Spectacular. And to me, the difference between excellent and spectacular, excellent is what is learning to do what the last person did as well as they did it. But spectacular is going a whole new direction. And I'm not interested in excellent. If I'm going to do something, I would rather fail 9 times and have spectacular for the 10th than have excellence all along. And I actually think that's a bit of a genetic thing with me, is just sort of, I like to poke the edges. What happens if I poke over here? I think that contributes hugely. The difference is when I was young, I was also a really obnoxious human being and difficult to get along with. I've come a long way in my social skills. So that probably makes me a little easier to tolerate than my college professors found me.
I'd have loved to have met you back then. So how people understand this a little bit more? I feel that there's value in it because, for example, if we all are using social media now and sharing our training on there, how can we build our confidence in being able to share our mistakes that are going to lead to us improving our training? How can we develop this mindset of not worrying we're wrong?
Oh, that's such a big question. There's a few elements there. First of all, unfortunately, Facebook has opened up aspects of human behavior which are not attractive. So, for example, if I want to show you how smart I am, one of the easiest ways for me to show you that I'm smarter than you is to pick apart your work. That, in my opinion, is a rather low-level form of demonstrating competence. A much more impressive level of competence would be me pointing out all the things you've done well and giving suggestions for how I might approach small levels of improvement where I think you can attain them. To me, that is where we need to be focused. But many people, the way they get their confidence is by putting other people down. And I don't know that they're conscious of that, but there's an awful lot of that on Facebook. So personally, I would not suggest that people put their work out on Facebook for open review. I just wouldn't. I would suggest that people pick and choose where they place their fragile work. So let me say fragile and explain that. Fragile is you actually don't know what to do next, which is different than putting out work that you know has issues, but you're not concerned about it because you also know what you're going to do next and how you're going to fix it. So when you're working with your fragile work, that's also your ego. That's who you are. I would suggest you be very careful about where you ask for input, because some people are going to give input whether they know what they're talking about or not. And maybe without a lot of thought to how you might feel as the learner after they have trampled you 9 times in a row, which they never would have done with an animal. Humans are given sometimes much less consideration. So I would not put out my work if I'm feeling fragile. I know where to go when I need help and feedback. And I go to those places, and that is not Facebook, or at least not Facebook as a whole, I think.
So find your tribe and then
Find your tribe.
Share your vulnerabilities.
And ideally, if you're in a tribe, the chief of that tribe should be responsible for helping the people learn to provide feedback in a way which is amenable, and also for helping individuals find ways to ask for feedback that is most likely to give a gentle result. So for example, if I put out a video and I say, I need help. Please be gentle with me. I have been working on this for a while. I'm very frustrated with myself, and I don't think I can take being rained on. Just saying that, putting that out there will hugely affect the way people come back. When you put something out and you say, feedback, please, or what do you think? What people are going to do just by human nature is narrow in on the problem areas. So we can ask for feedback in a way that softens the response. But also, if I'm in charge of a little tribe, I have my own little tribe. If somebody starts to come down hard, I will intercede pretty quickly and model behavior. So I will say, wow, you did such an amazing job that first 7 seconds. I love how you interacted. By doing that, it tends to cause all the comments that follow mine to change in tone because I spoke up, and I am most likely to do this when the video is most appalling, because when the video is thoroughly appalling, many people are probably watching going, oh my God, I have no idea how to respond to this. It's such a mess. Find the things that are good. Find them. You smiled. That was great. And then pick one or two things and gently redirect and ignore most of what you don't like. But I think we can learn so much about working with each other if we think that way.
I love it. And there's a lot of wisdom in those words when you look at where you are today and where you've come from. You've had great success. Can you bring us up to speed with where you are, Fenzi Dog Sports, your team tittling program, your books? Tell us a little bit about what you're up to now.
So Fenzi Dog Sports Academy is it's my baby. It's very important to me, and I think it's been hugely influential to changing dog sports. Our focus at FDSA is actually not pet owners or even trainers. It really is dog sports. It has evolved a little bit. We have a lot more behavior than we used to, but it's about encouraging really good training and kindness. So it's kindness to the dog, it's kindness to the handler, it's kindness to your instructor. It's almost a way of living as much as a way of training. And I think my husband would say that it's largely been successful because for the last 20 years, I've had a very single-minded focus in everything I do, in training my own dogs, seminars, teaching, books. Everything I do has been focused on making things better for the dog and improving relationships between dogs and people. So that is very much what FDSA is. And it's pretty big now. We have thousands of students every term. And it's incredibly important to me. I mean, in terms of people looking back on their lives, I can look back on my last 5 years and say, wow, I really believe I've made a difference in the world. So I'm very proud of that. TEAM is the Training Excellence Assessment Modules Titling Program. And what that means is it was set up in 6 levels of increasing complexity. And what we are looking for is excellent training. So there's approximately 10 exercises per level. And we're looking for things like, can you give one cue? Are you standing still when you give your cues? Is there extra behaviors in there? Are you training in the correct environment for your dog's stage of training? So in the first level, it should be in your house, in a familiar environment. In the second level, it's going to be a little more complicated. The distances are bigger. We add distractions. We add in elements of proving and generalizing behaviors. You can use food in the first level and some food in the second level, but it goes down over time. So what we're trying to do is look at what made up good training and sort of create a plan that if people simply follow the plan, almost by definition, they end up becoming better dog trainers. It's not an easy program, but I think if you succeed in it, it's pretty rewarding to having done it. It's also all online. So the emphasis, it's a little easier for people around the world. And the emphasis is on the quality of the trainer, not whether or not the dog can be successful at the dog show, because there's actually a lot of other elements beyond good training that influence which dogs can be successful at a dog show. So that's TEAM. The books. I didn't even know I was a writer until I started to write. So I started to write about 5 years ago with Deb, a little bit unsure about that. And now you cannot stop me. I'm a little out of control. As a matter of fact, I have three more books in my computer that I have opted not to do anything with for a while because I just have to stop. I've got to get a grip. But I write a lot on my blog. So that's what I do instead now is write my blog, write articles when people ask, do podcasts. Just try to change my scenery just a little bit.
Well, thank you for getting involved in things like podcasts and coming and hang out with us today. Can you just, before we move on to the next question, where can people go to find out more about all of this stuff?
Probably the easiest answer is just to go to denisefenzi.com, because from there you can easily find your way to everything I do, my books, the school. For those people around the world, Amazon has most of the books. So that's probably the easiest answer for most people. The webinars come through the school. That's the easiest. And if somebody needs help getting started, they're intrigued, they can just send me a note. I don't have a problem with that. I can get you started on the right path. It's a little overwhelming, 40 classes a term. So If you're just getting started, you could get a little like, oh my God. So if you send me a note, tell me about your situation, I'll get you on the right path.
So wonderful. Hey, thanks for that. And I love hearing about people's journeys, people's behavioral odysseys, as I like to call them. So thank you very much for sharing, Denise. Moving forward, I was a little bit unsure exactly how to word this question, but I'd really like to talk about your experiences with people who have found training with positive reinforcement difficult. For example, let's start with people who might be temperamentally unsuited to applying good training techniques. They might never write stuff down or be poor at counting reps, for example. Can you talk to this topic for us?
Yeah, because that's me. So, what I tell people, especially in the school, I do believe that some people are genetically natural dog trainers. For lack of a better word, you show them 2 or 3 times, they get it, it's intuitive for them. And others really struggle. Their brains process more slowly. So they may be quick to understand, but there's a big difference between understanding in your brain and getting it out through your fingers, right? It's not the same. That's why I'm such an advocate for applied training, because I think you can study till the cows come home, but that doesn't mean you can do it. So it's like learning to ski. I could study skiing for hours and hours and hours and watch videos, but that doesn't mean I can ski. The body has to do it. The problem is for many people, the will is there, but the body doesn't do what it's told. And that's so frustrating. And I think the more frustrated people get with themselves and the more they feel that they're failing, the worse their skills get, because now they feel badly about themselves and they start to opt out a little bit. So there's a few things. I try to really simplify this for people. First of all, simple tasks to start, just like with a dog, right? You train people and dogs the same way. Break it down. Identify what they're doing right. Ignore the fact that it took them 17 seconds after the click to get the cookie in the dog's mouth. Just ignore it. Look, you clicked it exactly at the right time. That was fantastic. Now, this time when you do it, right after you click, let's see if we can get the cookie into the dog's mouth in about 2 seconds. So the rhythm's going to be like this. Click, cookie in the mouth. So by breaking things down for people, the same way we break them down for dogs, I think they can succeed even if they don't, right, are not as precise. The other thing is my whole emphasis is watch the well-being of your learner. If your dog is happy and if you are happy, you will make progress. You may not make it anywhere near as fast as a good trainer, but just keep your dog in the game. Watch your dog. You just need to know that. What does your dog look like? And make 2 buckets. You can have a happy bucket and an unhappy bucket. You don't even need more buckets, just 2 buckets. At any second, you're looking at your dog. Is your dog happy or unhappy? And if your dog is starting to leave the happy bucket, throw out a couple cookies, stop training, relax, breathe, try again. Don't try to recover sessions. If you're struggling with the basics of good training, you want to simplify it down, happy buckets and unhappy buckets. And I think that actually gets you pretty far. That's probably what I spend the most energy on is avoiding unhappiness in the dog because the person's skills aren't there. So if your skills aren't there, that's fine. Happy buckets, unhappy buckets. And you will find that over time, as long as you keep your dog in the happy bucket. See, this is what's amazing about dogs, unlike snakes, rabbits, whatever. Dogs actually do kind of want to meet you halfway. Dogs learn things that amaze me. I have seen people training dogs and I actually could not tell what they were trying to teach the dog. And the next week I came back and you know what? The dog was doing the thing. It's a sheer miracle, right? How did the dog figure it out? Because nothing the person was doing was making any sense to me as a human observer. That's because dogs are amazing and dogs really do try to figure it out. They look for small cues. They put up with us. See, dogs are a great starting place in the sense that they put up with us. They also, the corollary is that they cap our skills because they're so good at putting up with us and learning in spite of us. We do a lot of superstitious learning. We actually think we taught the dog when it was actually just that we had a really good dog who did a whole lot of problem solving for us. Other animals aren't going to do that. So your highs are going to go higher if you emphasize training other animals because you have to. But dogs allow you to get in the game and learn to love what you're doing. If you don't love the training, you won't train. Dogs will teach you to love the activity. And I have seen people who I thought were really never going to get it. They just didn't have much natural skills. Give it a year or two, keep them in the game. And you know what? They do get there. They may never be at the same level, But as long as they are in the happy bucket and their dog is in the happy bucket, they're going to get what I do with people who struggle. I don't try to force them into something they're not. If writing things down makes them unhappy, if counting repetitions makes them unhappy, I'm not going to have them do it because they're going to opt out of the whole thing. And that's not in my best interest or really in their best interest.
So to sum that up, you believe that some people are potentially better genetically at training than others. And there's a big difference between understanding the theory and the application in your brain and then actually getting it out through your fingers. So if you're teaching someone that's having this challenge, then just start with simple tasks and reinforce the things that are going well and are being implemented correctly. And for the trainers, it's a case of making sure you stay in the happy bucket.
Pretty much. Stay in the happy bucket. There's my quote of the day.
So we call the podcast Stay in the Happy Bucket.
Happy bucket.
And so the happy bucket is, let's just define this again for everyone. The happy bucket is just ensuring that you're having a good time and your dog's having a good time. And if you're not in the happy bucket, then potentially throw some cookies out and take a break.
Exactly. And actually, this is a huge part of why I spend so much time teaching people how to play with their dog. Because in my experience, people who can play, just play with a dog. No toys, no food. Just get down and play like a kid plays with a dog. It's the fastest way to learn about the happy bucket. Because if you do something your dog doesn't like, dogs instantly opt out of personal play. There's no reason for them to stay. There's no food, there's no toys, right? So dogs only stay with you in personal play if you're doing it well. And it's instant feedback. So when the dog walks away, because dogs walk away. See, the problem with food is dogs often won't walk away. So you look like you're in a happy bucket. Personal play, And what happens is when the dog walks away, then the question is, what happened a half a second before your dog walked away? And people can go, oh, especially if they're videotaping. He didn't like it when I fill in the blank. And I know that because his ears went back, he turned his head, whatever. And then he walked away. When I teach people how to play with their dogs, I find it's very easy for them to stay in the happy bucket when they're training because they recognize the signs. It forces their ability to read dog behavior more quickly than anything else I know.
So play with the dogs, and this way we can get better at understanding their body language. Because you said dogs will stay around for food. And you also said that sometimes we think we're good at training our dogs, but our dogs are just really good at problem solving.
Yeah, I think people are very superstitious. And so it just so happens that on the day the dog finally learned the thing we wanted, we were wearing yellow. And the next thing you know, we're pretty well convinced that wearing yellow is the ticket. That's a huge problem because we often do many things all at the same time and we make bad assumptions, especially because dogs really are truly amazing at figuring us out. They just do. And I often think the dogs are better at figuring out what the handler wants than another human being would be at figuring it out, which says a lot. That's why dogs allow us to be poor trainers. That's why historically dogs have learned for hundreds of years, well before we had a clue. I don't think that's so true when you're training a chicken. On the other hand, when you're training a chicken, you lose out on the amazing value of having a relationship with a dog. And there's, in my opinion, nothing quite like having a dog for a friend. There's a reason why dogs live in our homes and chickens don't.
I like that for the title of the episode, actually. There's a reason dogs live in our... Might make more sense to
Better
people.
than happy bucket?
I like it.
There's another thing that play does for us, which is really refinements in behavior and body language. It also teaches us a lot about arousal. Because when you do certain things and it gets your dog up, and you do other things to try to get your dog calm again because you don't want him biting you or pulling your clothes, you are learning, if you want to, if you pay attention, you are learning so much about bringing your dog higher when you need him higher, calming him down when you want to calm him down, and keeping him in the happy bucket, right? There's so much to be said for playing with the dog that has nothing to do in the conventional sense with training, but just for understanding so that you will be a better trainer.
So if you're just getting started, you're not quite there yet, maybe you use the word mediocre to describe yourself or your training skills. Maybe it's a kind of frame of mind of stepping back from your goals and reevaluating what you're getting out of your time with your dog, as opposed to I must train this and I have to do it by now.
Because frustrated trainers are never good trainers. When you decide that your dog has to learn a specific thing and you are not getting there, a little frustration drives change. So that's good. If a human's a little bit frustrated, then they have some time to think about it and they may do a better job on the next session. But a lot of frustration, unfortunately, not only does it lower our skills, but it tends to change, it stiffens our body, and it causes us to do things that look a whole lot like anger. And maybe there is a little anger in there, right? And anger needs to stay out of dog training. It really does. Not only because it ruins our skills, but because the dog knows. And then, of course, then the dog starts to avoid us because we're scary. That makes us more frustrated and more angry. And now we have a really problematic dynamic. For sure, if a newer or mediocre trainer is struggling, I would strongly suggest they change what they are working on. They need success. We need success. When you have a lot of success, you have something to build on. Now you can take on some challenges, but don't start with things that are making you miserable.
And this is something we've talked about in the past before, about slowing down your training and watch what's happening in the present moment as opposed to what's not happening, i.e., you're not at the goal that you thought you would be at. Can you potentially, we'll move on to the next question, but just before we do, one more thing. What is one little tidbit takeaway you can potentially offer people that they could use to, I'm going to say, and maybe you've got a better way of saying it, let go and be more present?
I understand how important it is to let go, and it's the hardest thing to tell people to do because it's emotions and you cannot direct your emotion, right? So I can say you have to not care, but how do you give that to another person? I actually think it's the hardest thing to give. The only thing I would say is if you can fall in love with your dog or fall in love with your learner, that alone helps a ton. So if I'm frustrated with one of my dogs and I do something with that dog that I love to watch, like walking my old dog makes me happy. It makes me smile. It makes me appreciate her independent of me. It's now, look how amazing my dog is. Look at her just for herself. That puts me in a much better frame of mind to keep the importance of the things I am trying to teach her in proportion, because I'm just doing silly pet tricks, right? All these things I do are just tricks. I don't have any dog who's attacking people. I don't have any serious issues, right? So everything is trivial. And when I watch how amazing my dog is just as an individual, that softens me. I know that it helps me a lot to let go of my goals and just to say, wow, you're just amazing because you are you. So that works for me. I don't know if that would work for the next person, but it's a start.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Denise. That was a lot of fun to talk about. For our next question, I wanted to talk about something we haven't actually really gone into depth about on this podcast show before, and that is socialization. Can you share your view on the importance of good socialization for us, please, Denise, and how you might define this term?
Yeah, I actually think in terms of socializing the way people thought about it, let's say 20 years ago. So I think maybe we've regressed a little, and here's why. People are taking too much ownership of socialization. In my mind, socialization is a natural process. It does not require a human being's intervention to be effective. So I do not like the emphasis on adding food in order to create a classically conditioned response to whatever it is you want the dog to like. So for example, you want your dog to like people wearing hats. Therefore, you take it to places with people wearing hats and you have the hat people feed your dog. I think that's a problem. I think it's actually undercutting the element of socialization because now rather than your dog saying, there is a person with a hat, how do I feel about people with hat, and working it through on their own, it's there's a person with a hat, and before they have a chance to have a natural process, you're feeding them. And now the dog is thinking about the food and not the person with the hat. I am a huge fan of what I say is exposure, not necessarily interaction. And whenever possible, as long as your dog's in the happy bucket, leave the dog alone. Let the dog on their own time decide, do I want to go closer? Do I want to back up? Now, there are exceptions. Let's say your dog is going closer because, and this is true, we do tend to approach things we're afraid of because we want to get a better look. That's where the human needs to step in and prevent the dog from getting into a space that he can't handle himself, right? So that's reasonable. So getting closer until you see the dog's body language is such that you can feel the conflict. Now you should stop. That's where you add value, is to stop. But don't add food. Don't intervene. Don't say, oh my God, I need 99 more people with hats. I would say, what do you want this dog's life to look like long term? What do you need? Do you need the dog to be comfortable going to your child's school to pick him up? Do you need your dog comfortable on the beach? Do you like to hike? What does your dog's life look like? And now expose your puppy to that in small doses over time. Don't make him sit there for 4 hours because you have the day off. Just make it a natural part of your life. I would say minimize the use of food unless you have a problem. Now, if you have a problem, then a podcast is not the appropriate place to talk it through, right? I think then you need help. If your dog has true fear issues, that's a different matter. But 90% of dogs, like if I just look out the window at the people walking up and down the street with their new puppies, just people, human beings, they, in my opinion, are doing a better job than we, i.e. professional trainers, are doing socialization. I think they're doing a much better job at just letting their animals grow up. In the same way with our human children, I don't feel any need to take my 2-year-old places and feed him M&Ms. Why would I do that? What I need to do is take him places and watch his behavior. If my child's having a meltdown because there's a clown standing in front of him and he's scared to death, I know to back up, right? I know to use distances, but I won't start feeding him. That starts to put human beings in a place we're just not that good, in my opinion. The natural process of socialization is way better than we are and way more important than we are. So let it happen. Just watch your learner. Make sure you're not asking too much. Puppy's happy. Next time you want to go on the car, does the puppy want to go? If the puppy says no, thank you, it might be worth looking back at the last thing that happened. But short of that, simply get out and do whatever you would normally do. I also don't think it requires interaction. So what I mean is, if your dog's life is going to be primarily you in dog sports, I do not think your dog needs to interact with a lot of people. I do think your dog needs to be exposed to a lot of people. And if my puppy's hanging out and the person says, can I say hi to your dog? And I say, well, if the dog wants to go up, you're welcome to pet the dog. Don't approach my dog. If my dog wants to come to you, call her over, and then that's fine. I don't have a problem with that because that to me is how my life is. That's my normal life. But I don't particularly want my adult dogs lunging enthusiastically at random people. That's not interesting to me. It is not interesting to me to walk down the street and have my dog say hello to each person. Now, that's my life. Now, somebody else's life might be different. As a result, I don't want my puppies doing it either. I would much rather people ignore my puppy, so my puppy ignores them. And then at some point, maybe the person says, now I'd like to say hi. Is that okay? Yeah, that's fine. Say hi, no problem. But I don't want it to be the focus of the interaction. I don't want my puppy going, look, new person. That means they're going to squeal over me and I'm going to run up and climb on their head. I don't like that. I've been in Europe recently, in France in particular, and I really liked what I saw with people and dogs, just sort of, it was a person and their dog. It wasn't a person and dog as community property. In the United States, it feels a little bit more like dogs are community property, and everyone thinks that by definition, every dog should go up to every person, and every person has the right to interact with every dog. That's not my preference. I really liked that more quiet, but almost say that people interacted with dogs there the way we interact with other people's children here. For the most part, when people walk down the street with their kids don't go running up to random people, and people don't go running up to random kids. It's a little more subdued. You probably, if I was interacting with you, I probably would not reach out and pet you. You are not my husband. I would assume that your wife would not reach out and pet my husband. We don't do that. We have a little bit more boundaries. And I would like to socialize in a way that leads to the boundaries that I prefer.
And so you made a few analogies there to what we do with our kids and thinking about that with regards to what we do with our dogs. And I read a blog post you wrote about this subject. Do you think there's value in potentially making that comparison?
Of how we socialize dogs and children?
Yeah, well, how maybe we do with our dogs what we kind of do with our kids.
Well, that's what I think we should do in the sense of a little bit more relaxed. I think with dogs, some of us get a little carried away. I think, isn't it obvious that children require socialization? Would we all kind of agree that would be, you would not keep your child in the basement for 3 years, right? We know that. And yet we don't feel the need to talk about the fact that, did you take your child to the shopping center 3 times this week? So we know it, we accept it, and we simply incorporate the child into our life. But it's not conscious beyond that. With the dogs, we've gone to the other extreme. We have taken it so far that our behavior is unnatural. And I actually think that causes problems for us.
Yeah, that's interesting, and look forward to hearing people's viewpoints on this moving forward. So feel free to build upon Denise's great input there and share your thoughts and feelings in the podcast right up. But really like that, and lots of food for thought for everyone. When we were talking about topics for this web class, we're not in a web class, are we? We're in a podcast. We were talking about topics for this podcast. We put a question in the private Facebook group of Animal Training Academy in the members group. And so one of our members asked a question which we could use to build on your answer there, Denise. What 3 behaviours would you teach to a new puppy? What things would you find are important? Are there generic ones, or is it context situation specific, like you said?
So I think there's 3 things. I'm going to divide that up into training and into life. So in life, I want my puppy to love me. And that's just if the puppy looks at me, I'm going to talk nicely. Hello, puppy dog. You're so cute. Make the tail wag. Can you make your puppy's tail wag? All day long, I want my puppy to look at me and be happy. So let's call that a behavior. And I'm going to spend a lot of energy on that. Playing tug is a big deal to me. Playing ball is a big deal. Those are just sort of interactive, casual things. On the other side, what I think the question was more meant to get to was training specific. So the 3 things I probably teach, probably starting from day 1. The first one is how to get a cookie out of my hand. That seems so obvious, but puppies actually don't do a very good job. They sniff around the food, but they can't quite find it. And I do feed in a very specific way with the cookie under my thumb. So day 1 is probably, can you find the cookie and eat it, right? So we're going to spend some time on that. And that is going to morph into how I train heel position. I start that immediately. At 8 weeks, I start working on that in my house because it entertains me. I want the puppy to learn to go away from me. So right away, I'm going to teach maybe go around a cone or get on a platform because I want to balance the puppy. I talk a lot about balance. I want the puppy to come towards me and then I fuss over them. I want the puppy to go away from me. That is probably going to be shaped. I want the puppy to learn to use their mouth. So I'm probably going to start a retrieve on day 1. It's very easy to teach it at that age. And I want the puppy to use their nose. So I'm probably going to start with scent discrimination day 1, day 2, because that gives me balance. It gives me foot activities, getting on a platform. It gives me come towards me. It gives me go away. So what I'm trying to do is keep the range of things that occurs to the dog when I want to shape them long-term viable. So for example, if you do no activities with sniffing for the first year and then you try scent discrimination, it may well be out of the dog's repertoire and you're going to have to work so much harder to make it salient to the dog. So I want to keep those basics in the picture. So it doesn't matter so much what you teach, but I would think in terms of coming towards you, going away from you, using feet, using eyes, using nose, moving body. And if you can keep all of those in the picture, I think it simplifies life long term.
So first thing, make sure you're keeping your dog in a happy bucket. Teach your puppy how to eat, and you find it fun to teach the heel position. And teach them to go away from you, come towards you, retrieve, and use their feet, eyes, nose, and body basically, and put the basics in the picture from the start. Great information. And I know there's tons of people who listen to this show whom this is going to be highly beneficial. So once again, thank you very much for sharing, Denise. Moving forward, I was wondering if we could please discuss one of my favorite topics, and this is choice. Can you tell us what this word means to you and choice's relationship to frustration?
This is a huge topic for me. And like you, it is one I have grown into quite a bit in the past few years, is a recognition of really defining choice. What is choice? And how are we using it? Because if you think about it, choice applies to all training. It's positive training, not positive training. Things the dog likes training, things the dog does not like training. Within the bucket, the happy bucket, things dogs like, I think we need to think about how we are using our motivators and whether or not we are removing choice. So for example, I do not believe in training hungry dogs. So most of the traditional wisdom I have learned over the years is work with your dog hungry because they're motivated. The problem is they're motivated by a choice removing function. If you are hungry, do you really have a choice? And I would argue, no, you don't, because you want to survive. So if survival is an option, then haven't you just taken away choice? I want my dogs working for dessert, not for dinner. So I would much rather feed a dog or work with a dog who's not hungry. who's actually okay. Now, if you're looking at like a Labrador, they've never had a not hungry moment in their entire lives. I get that. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is in terms of the dog's reason for staying in the game. I want the dog staying in the game because they're having a good time with me and they enjoy whatever I'm providing, whether that's food, entertainment, or toys. I don't want the dog saying, oh my God, I haven't eaten in 12 hours. She's holding food. I am not enjoying my work and I can't walk away because I'm too hungry. That to me is not choice and causes not only frustration in the actual learning, it confuses the human because the human says, I must be doing a good job because my dog is not leaving. But the dog can't leave because they're hungry. And I think this is something we need to think about when we consider the value of the motivator we're using in relation to what we're asking the dog to do. That doesn't mean I don't use high value motivators. I absolutely do, especially if curiosity is the alternative. Like the environment's just pretty damned amazing and there's nothing I can do to reduce that value. But when we're talking about dogs that are just in high stress situations and it's game oriented things that we are training, I'm not talking about them to have. Those are a little different. Then I'm more willing to put pressure on the animal. But when it's just my silly retrieve, my silly scent discrimination, my healing, nothing the dog needs in life, I want the dog working from true choice. And what that does is it puts a lot more responsibility on me. If I'm training for Cheerios, which is a breakfast cereal of pretty moderate value, the dog's choices are doing nothing and hanging out in my house versus doing something with me that involves learning and eating Cheerios. That puts more pressure on me to do a good job and less pressure on the dog because my dogs will walk away from Cheerios. Now, when I go out into the big wide world where things are more exciting, I will absolutely up the value of that motivator because they're not afraid. Now, if they're afraid, that's a whole nother story. But as long as the dog is just curious about the world, yes, I will overwhelm curiosity, but that does not lead to frustration because the dog's choice is between curiosity and work. That's different than starvation and work or fear and work. Then there's things like husbandry. Some things just have to happen. I will add more. I am more willing to take some of the choice out of it in the sense that I will train a dog hungry to do its nails because I recognize that those nails really do have to get done. And if I have to put more pressure on the animal, I will because I don't think I have a lot of choice. I'm not going to drug my dog every time I want to do their nails. But in the dog sports world, I think those are few and far between. I'd love to see conversations about this, the ethics of using motivators where the dog doesn't have a lot of option. So food comes to mind as a big one. Toys with high drive dogs that are sort of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. If you show a Malinois, a ball, or a tug, you can absolutely remove choice. They are so genetically driven to play that they really cannot opt out. And what that causes, as I watch it over months and years, is a very edgy, frustrated, frantic style of work because the dog has learned over time to work when they probably should be opting out, but they will not or cannot. So I think there's just tons of, you can do hours and hours of podcasts just on this topic. I find it so interesting. Balancing all of our interests, especially in the world of sport. In one other area, it's probably worth talking about this is in reactivity. In the United States, and I assume across the world in general, there is a lot of emphasis on conditioning with food, activity, and fear. The problem is I don't think we're seeing anywhere near the success rate we should see when the food is gone. So I think what's happening is dogs are not opting in by choice. The food is causing them to be in situations they don't want to be in, but the food pulls them in. And so they're not getting better. If anything, they're sensitizing rather than desensitizing. I am well aware that this is a function of poorly done conditioning. I get that. But it is so widespread that I think we need to take a hard look at whether or not we should stop using food as a default in our working with dogs that are reactive. Because if it's poorly used that often, that the food is being used to cause dogs to go into spaces where they end up over threshold, then we need to reconsider it as a technique, or at least reconsider it as a technique that we give to pet people who are extremely unlikely to use it well, especially when we can use distances as an alternative. We can just get further away and we can use play as an alternative. You might want to have Amy Cook on your show because she talks about using play, personal play, and distances to help with reactivity as opposed to food, which is just some interesting stuff to think about and talk about. And I think huge areas for intelligent discussion and debate. And, really a lot of learning could be done in that area.
All right, we'll keep your ears peeled for Amy Cook in the future. Amy, I'm just acknowledging that you haven't given consent to that, but I'll do my best. So the frustration, just to clarify for everyone, the frustration is that we're talking about in this specific conversation is because we're placing animals in situations where they can't opt out because, for example, they're hungry and they need to stay to survive. So that choice is removed.
Yes.
And a way of thinking about it, and you've given me too many options here for names of this podcast, Denise, is to have our dogs working for dessert rather than dinner.
Yes, we have another one. So let's see. We have happy bucket, unhappy bucket. We have, dogs live in the house and chickens don't.
That's why dogs live in their house and chickens don't. Yeah.
Yes, and dogs working for dinner
So
versus dessert.
Labradors are just working for dessert all the time.
My heart goes out to labs. Can you imagine starving all the time?
So what can lab owners do then to facilitate more choice with food?
There's no such thing. You could feed them stones. I think it is a genetic reality of being a lab. It's actually sad. I mean, I know some people literally breed for food drive, right? Think about what that means. What that means is you're breeding for animals who are on a diet 24 hours a day. And I bet there's a huge element of aggression in there too. I don't know if this has been studied, but when I'm on a diet, I am one cranky lady. So I would assume that our dogs who are perpetually starving are probably cranky. I would assume that their frustration tolerance goes down and their tendency towards aggression goes up. I'm sure people have looked at this. I'm not aware of it. But it just seems logical to me that if you breed animals that are perpetually starving, you're going to have more issues.
And when we're talking about this question before the podcast, we talked about how we might reflect on our relation to training dogs. Well, we talk about this question in relation to training dogs, I should say. But we also mentioned that we might draw some parallels with human children.
Yeah.
What are some potential examples?
So again, Amy Cook has suggested that when you think in terms of a child, think in terms of a 2-year-old, not a 5-year-old, not a 15-year-old, right? A 2-year-old in terms of development, emotional development, what you can expect, what is reasonable. So that is mentally where I tend to put my head. I think if a 2-year-old were doing this, what would I do? So if I found a 2-year-old on the kitchen table by sugar in the sugar bowl, how would I approach them when I was going to remove them from the table? Would I start screaming and yelling? Would I threaten them? Would I spank them? How would I handle that situation? I'm a fairly, laid back parent, liberal parent. I raise my children much like my dogs. I'm very patient. So for example, when my kids were little and all the other babies would sit in the cart, when you go through the shopping center, I have my children never did sit in shopping carts and obediently, I'm so impressed by these babies that just sit there. My kids don't want to sit in the cart. They want to get out and do things. And so I look at my little 2-year-old running up and down the aisles, removing all the cans from the shelf. Now, your first thought could be, you let your child do this? Well, yes, but I put them all back. So what difference does it make, right? So I let my kids have a lot of freedom when they're little, interacting with the world, getting into stuff. I have a couple of rules. You cannot make life hard for other people. That's not okay. So you can't do it at the expense of other people. But like I said, I can take care of putting the cans back on the shelf, no problem. But otherwise, I try to give them as much freedom and choice and experience as I possibly can, as long as they're safe and not causing harm to others. And I find that my kids at the ages now of 13 and 17 are really quite respectful and really very nice with other people and very nice with other adults and mostly respectful. Not always. We're still working on it. It's a work in process. But so I try to raise my kids and my dogs sort of similarly. I give my puppies a lot of freedom as long as they're not causing troubles for others. And I clean up where they make troubles and structure them. And I try to handle things that they do wrong about the same as I would with a 2-year-old. And that helps me. And I think sometimes it helps other parents as well. So we do try to give our children choice in life. Do you want bologna or do you want salami or what do you want? We try and we limit their choices so they don't become overwhelmed. We think in terms of when they're being hyper and hysterical, is this because they're bored or is this because they're tired, right? So the same behavior, but coming from two very different reasons. One requires a nap and the other requires letting the poor thing do something. I actually find it very helpful to look at my dogs and think in terms of children. I know that that really bothers some people because historically that's a very unscientific approach. But I'll tell you, it sure does solve a lot of problems. And I say, if this was a 2-year-old, what would occur to me? And I think, well, it's 8 o'clock at night. They've been out all day. Probably time to go to bed. I find it helpful. I just have to be a little careful with other people when I say it because they think it's so unscientific. But you know what? If it works, what can I say?
Hey, thank you so much for all of this, Denise. Sadly, we're going to start heading towards the end, but that's okay because we're going into one of my favorite parts of the podcast show. And based on previous conversations we've had today, I think you're going to really enjoy this part as well. It's called Story Time. Denise, can you please share with everyone listening 2 or 3 of your favorite stories from your experience training and working with animals so far and some of the important lessons that these have taught you along the way?
So there's one that I always tell because it keeps me in check, and it's about training dogs that are not cooperating and health, physical well-being. The most recent example, I could give you 20 examples over time, but I'll give you the one that happened most recently. It was about six months ago. A student's dog died of cancer, and the dog was 4 years old. Now, she didn't know the dog had cancer. Nobody knew until maybe 2 weeks beforehand. However, as a student of mine, and many of my fellow instructors also had her as a student, we struggled to work with this team. This dog had very odd behavior over time, up and down and unpredictable. One day it would work, the next day it wouldn't. And it was very frustrating for all of us. And then the dog died. And sort of once again, it hit me over the head with the fact that we are not in the body of another being. We can never know what another being is feeling. We cannot know it physically. We cannot know mentally. We can't ever know for sure. We can only guess. And I don't think I would ever revert to the sorts of training I've done in the past. I think I'm simply a new person. But one of my most best arguments when I'm talking to somebody who's comfortable with using compulsion with a dog who, quote, knows it, is you can never know it. If that dog had been with a different trainer and a different circumstance, she could have been very, very hard on the dog and justified her behavior by saying the dog knows it. I know the dog knows it because he did it yesterday. And I think when we have experiences like that, and like I said, I could give you many examples of health-related experiences, it really slows us down before we cause harm because you don't know. You can never know, and you get to live with yourself afterwards. So while I am not one for guilt, I think what happened yesterday is no longer relevant. What I will say is I don't want to do things today and then in a week look back and say, if I had only known. I want to avoid that as much as possible. And when I'm kind, I have the best chance of avoiding those negative things in life. So that would be a story that I think has been very impactful on me, and I go back to it frequently. The second one is when I'm stuck. When I'm training my dog, I remember I was working with my dog Burrito on something. I'd been working for a long time on this behavior. I had not been progressing for a very long time, months. And really, you should progress. If months are going by and you're not making progress, you need to stop. And so what I did one day, I videotaped, and instead of watching it as me training my dog, I watched it as an instructor watching somebody else. So I became the student and I became the instructor to myself with my dog, and I solved the problem in 1 minute flat. I looked at it. It was obvious. It was plain as day what I was doing wrong. But I needed to step out of the picture to be able to see the problem, and then was able to fix it pretty quickly. I think we easily forget. We get sucked into our own situation, and I find it very valuable to step out, videotape, and now watch it as a trainer. Don't watch it as a participant, and you might be amazed at the things you see. So there's just a kind of a general good training technique if you're finding yourself stuck. And my third story, this is not a story. It's just my growing recognition of the value of perspective. And I've come to it largely because dog people lack perspective. And I don't think it's because dog people are different. I think people as a whole lack perspective. And what I mean is we live in our own bodies, in our own worlds, in our own experiences, with our own knowledge. And it takes a leap for us to go into the perspective of another person who has a different body, a different set of experiences, a different perspective. And I think very, very hard to try to incorporate into our lives a natural tendency to look at our students' perspectives. Why do they want what they want? Why are they frustrated? Why are they handling their dog the way they handle their dog? And not just in an academic sense. I mean, convince yourself of it. Put yourself in their perspective until you can argue their perspective. And when I do that, I find my ability to problem solve for that person goes up dramatically because now I truly am them. And when I am them, I can find solutions that will be palatable for them and that will actually work for them. And I'll do it with dogs too. I'll even put myself in the perspective of the dog. Why is my dog bothering me for the last 3 hours to go for a walk? Well, my dog is 14 years old. She lives in my house and her entire life, her whole structure is about me. I choose everything for her. Her going for a walk is the only thing. She pushes me to go for her walk. That is her life. And when I look at it from her point of view, rather than saying, you go for a walk every day, you have a great life, I say, what does she actually control? She controls going for a walk. That's about it, isn't it? And then that makes me a whole lot more likely to stand up, get the leash, and take her. So I think just as a lifestyle, trying to, when you're frustrated with a person, with a dog, with a client, with your neighbor, trying to put yourself into their point of view and not as an academic exercise, for real, convincing yourself of it makes you a more calm, kind, accepting person. And all of that influences your ability to influence others. I often say, I have an expression I use a lot. This is your fourth one for the podcast. Do you want to feel better or do you want to change behavior? Feeling better is screaming and yelling and getting stuck in your own body and your own perspective. Changing behavior is looking at it from the other point of view and figuring out what you can do that will actually solve the problem, even though you may not feel better because you lose your self-righteous place. Yeah. So I think those are the things that I would throw out there for dog trainers that maybe one of them will resonate with somebody somewhere and give them something to think about, maybe just to improve their quality of life, if not necessarily their skill as an animal trainer.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, the Do You Want to Feel Better or Do You Want to Change Behavior podcast. We could write a whole book on quotes from this podcast, Denise. That wasn't the one I was going to draw out of what you just said. The one I liked. So, guys, listening to this podcast, guys and girls, wait for the follow-up quote book to come out later. The one I liked was put yourself in their perspective until you can argue their perspective. And I like that because it applies to humans, but I like it because it's so valuable, I think, to think about our dogs as well and our animals. What is their perspective? Can you argue your dog's perspective? Is that a good way to think, do you think, or is that going to dangerous territory?
That is exactly, I mean, personally, I'm sure your listeners have comments on this, but I find that if you can argue your animal's perspective, you will, I mean, if you look at an animal in a zoo living in a cement box, you can academically say that sucks, or you can put yourself in the body of the animal, sit in that cement pit, look at the people staring at you, look around you at what you can do with yourself and start pulling the hair out of your body because you have nothing to do. And in terms of feeling, looking at the pit and saying how sad for the animal is nothing like putting yourself in the perspective of the animal, pulling the hair out of your body because you're so bored and so frustrated. And your willingness to step up and make things better is going to be much greater if you get out of the academic perspective and into the true feeling of the matter.
Lots and lots to think about, lots and lots of questions I could ask, but I'm not going to because I'm aware of the time as well.
Yeah, someday we have to get on with our lives.
So we will potentially make the quote book shorter than it could be and move to the last question. Denise, for this last one, could you just please now, we've gone to the start of your journey, we're going to go not just to the end of your journey or to the current position of your journey, but into the future. Can you tell us what you would like to see happen over the next 5 to 10 years in the animal training world?
This is actually a very hard one. I think science is going to show us that dogs are much more similar to humans than we have known. And that is absolutely what is happening now in terms of the studies they're doing with, MRIs and some of these things. We're recognizing how humans are to dogs. I would like that to become a driving force in our decision making. In the sense of being willing to take the perspective of an animal and recognizing that it's not just something that an automaton, it's a living, breathing thing. I would like that information to go out into the world as a whole in a much greater sense, because I think it will dramatically improve the living conditions of animals. It is a sentient being. It feels pain. It hurts. It has mental pain. that is probably the number one thing I would like to see, because I think from that will flow better interactions, better training, better human to animal behavior in general.
Great answer. And I'm sure the listeners of this podcast are resonating with this. And I like your view of how we may be discovering, and we are discovering, and we're going to continue to discover how similar dogs are to us. So it's an exciting time.
I think so.
Moving forward.
It's an amazing time.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing all of that today, Denise. That does bring us to the end. We've already talked about this once already in the podcast, but just to remind everyone listening where they can go to find out more about you and what you're up to.
So my blog and my general information is at denisefenzi.com. The name of my school is FenziDogSportsAcademy.com. And I guess I should tell you it is registering now, but you would be 1 week late because classes started on the 1st. You should always feel welcome to send me a note if you need help, either through Facebook Messenger or actually Facebook Messenger is best because we can have a dialogue. If you need some help getting started with selecting a class, you should send me a note and I will certainly help you. And I feel that from what I've seen of Ryan's groups and philosophy and all, it's really very well aligned with what we do at the school and the philosophy within our groups. So if you feel comfortable and welcome in his groups, I think you would feel comfortable and welcome in my groups as well.
And we have a lot of tribal members that are part of both tribes. By the time this episode gets released, you will be a month late, I think.
Well, then you could target June. June 1st.
June 1st is the next intake, is it?
Yes.
Perfect. So target June. And we're going to link to all of the stuff in the show notes for today's episode. But before we officially, don't have my officially, not officially. I've kind of tried to warp some kind of weird internet blanket over the word officially then. Before we officially wrap up, maybe I can start something. Denise, from myself and on behalf of everyone listening, we really appreciate you taking time to come on the show today and to send messages back and forth to me to get this show all set up for today. It's really appreciated. Thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Fantastic. And we do, of course, really appreciate all of you tuning in today as well. If you have enjoyed the episode and you were interested in carrying on the conversation about working with our animals in the most positive, funnest, choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as a Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. There's something there for absolutely everyone, and we're looking forward to having you join the tribe. That's it for this episode, though. We will wrap it up there. Thanks again so much for listening. This is the official end of the podcast. You'll hear from us again soon.